Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Genesis Block. In today's podcast, we have Yash presenting a thematic analysis on the Web3 gaming ecosystem. So Yash, with that, over to you.
Right. So just before we get into gaming, just a breakdown on why blockchain is useful, right? So usually when you're trying to make any transaction of value and you're trying to exchange assets, there's always a centralized intermediary who has to oversee the transaction, authenticate users, and they end up taking quite high transaction fees for their services, right? Blockchain technology removes that centralized intermediary and replaces it with a ledger, which basically decentralized validators all over the world secure, right? So these decentralized validators are incentivized more fairly and correctly as compared to banks because they have an active interest in the growth of the token itself. Like if you look at Ethereum or Bitcoin, for example, if the price of Ethereum and Bitcoin goes up because these validators are, you know, basically rewarded Ethereum or Bitcoin, they would also be, very, very well incentivized to ensure the security of the network so that the price goes up and so that, this virtuous cycle continues. Um, and the same kind of logic applies to gaming because traditionally games are developed by, these big game developers, and the in-game currencies are usually, completely firstly controlled by the in-game developer. And secondly, you can't really exchange that in-game currency for any real world money. So all your time and effort that you put into the game remains within the game, and it kind of is a wasted effort in a way if you look at it, from trying to be productive, etc. Crypto comes in and completely turns that on its head because now for the first time you can, buy and trade and sell currency and exchange it for other assets like, stable coins and Ethereum, etc. And it's really given an opportunity for gamers to come in and make real money and actually be rewarded for their time instead of having their time considered wasted, right? So that is the main promise, I guess, of Web3 and crypto, to monetize games and gamer, man hours into real money, right? So before we get into, details of the gaming market, do you guys have anything you want to say?
Um,
No, nothing as such.
yeah,
All
no, I
right.
think you covered the main 2 points, the main topic.
Right. So, okay. So before we get into details of how, what the pros and cons of gaming, let's just do an overview of the gaming crypto ecosystem. So crypto gaming hit its peak towards the end of 2021. And this is, when there was crypto was at peak hype and speculation and greed. And the fully diluted market cap of the biggest game, Axie Infinity, reached an astounding $43 billion, with the Axie token reaching $160. Now, obviously, since then, gaming, anyways, being a very risky industry and crypto also being risky itself, gaming crypto is one of the riskiest markets you can invest in. And it crashed from its all-time highs, rightfully so, with most games losing, 99% of the currency value. Now, there are many different aspects. One is obviously the general macro environment. Uh, and the second thing is basically that game developers of crypto games haven't yet figured out the perfect model for tokenomics, and usually what ends up happening in game is lots of hyperinflation of the main currency because tokenomics have not really been ironed out yet in the Web3 crypto gaming space. But still today there are lots of games that people still go and play crypto games. I mean, the numbers don't really compare to the biggest games out there like Fortnite or Minecraft, for example. But there has been definite user onboarding since this peak, and it has gotten a lot of more people into the crypto gaming space. So games like Splinterlands, Alien Worlds, Farmers World, they all have like 100,000 to 200,000 users, which is quite a high number if you think about how deep a bear market we are in currently, right? The other problem is there's a steep learning curve with crypto because users need to learn how to create a wallet, operate a wallet, and there's just too much friction because of that. And it's not as easy to just, go and download a game and start playing it as it is in just traditional gaming. Second thing is there's a lot of scalability bottlenecks on blockchains currently, especially games built on Ethereum. Users usually for any interaction they have to pay, gas fees, which can be really high during peak market demand. And blockchains need to kind of solve for gaming and allow microtransactions to be more seamless than they are currently. And the last thing is that because these games want to, kind of take advantage of this hype and speculation, they release games with a very short development cycle, and hence there was a greater focus on tokens and earning and the whole play to earn and play and earn and all of these different metas, so to speak, and they focused on that instead of the actual core gameplay, which is why most people came like into the crypto gaming space. For example, Axie Infinity, the country of Philippines made up 40% of all of its users, and they only played the game because at its peak, it allowed them to earn money which they could not have normally earned just working normal jobs in the Philippines, which is kind of crazy, but it kind of shows that users and gamers were incentivized to play the game, but they didn't really enjoy playing it. They did it only because of the money, right? And long term, I don't think that's a sustainable business model, because the way it worked is it just rewarded earlier users who could then sell at a higher price to users who came in later into the game with no real output that could justify that higher price, essentially, which is a typical Ponzi scheme style. So these are the main problems with crypto gaming. Before
There
we
was
go
a
into
just there was a really good article by Kobe actually going over the entire Ponzi-nomics gaming model of Axie Infinity. So he was essentially like, if you think of a box and then you click that box and you keep on pressing that box, and you get a lot of money when you first, a lot of money and a lot of rewards when you first press that box, and you keep on pressing the box and box and box, and then the amount of money flow that comes out of the box over time significantly reduces, right? And it tends towards zero, obviously, because you can't keep on rewarding people for just pressing a box. And that's essentially what Axie Infinity was, when a lot of the action or a lot of the gameplay on Axie Infinity was just grift. It wasn't really fun gameplay. It was just like pressing a button a billion times until the amount of rewards that you got from pressing that button tended towards zero. So that, in a nutshell, is how Kobe, and probably I would also describe the early state of Web3 gaming, which is just completely, it was just on that sliding scale of play to earn. It was way more earn and way less on actually enjoying gameplay.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Kobe also was the one who, was a strong proponent of Axie, and then it crashed, and then he had this whole realization. So, I mean, it's great that he did, but it also,
Take it with a pinch of salt, I guess.
yeah, take it with a pinch of salt, maybe.
I think
But the fact that he, admitted that, I was completely wrong, that also has its own merit, I would say.
yeah, I think it was just the how grandiose what was happening was, and what I mean by that is people like you mentioned in Philippines were actually earning more than minimum wage in what they could earn in Philippines. So instead of doing any job which gives them what they are legally, at least minimum wage that they legally earned, should be getting, this by just clicking a box, they got more. Um, and that, I mean, people in the bull market used as an example of why the bull market is different this time, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And then of course, then we know what happened. So I think
I
it's
think when
sort of
when
speculation and um,
yeah,
foresight.
when prices go up, people will justify it with anything, right? Like,
Right.
because you're just so blinded by these insane movements in prices that you don't even see anywhere else really, where coin is just 100x, etc. And Axie was one of those coins, and people just couldn't see far enough into the future of how this would pan out when this, I mean, clearly there was a loop of value accrual, which is why the price went so high, but that loop also worked the same way when the price kind of fell. So it was a rapid rise and rapid fall, and that was only because of the way the tokenomics were designed.
Yeah, and I mean, we all were blinded by it, right? I mean, I remember when
For
the
sure.
entire Axie craze was happening, Packy McCormick released an article that kind of got me into. I mean, I never played Axie because honestly, I didn't want to spunk a bunch of money on buying those Axies in the first place, which I guess can tell you a lot about the flaw of the model. But yeah, like just looking at the raw numbers, like it was just on a hockey stick curve, right? And we were all in a mania. Um, and I think for a lot of us, it was our first learning experience with such manias. I think that once you see what's on the other side and what you got wrong at that point in time, it's the best learning experience you can have. So
yeah, Sky Mavis is the 5 wallets that controlled the multi-sig. They all got hacked by North Korea, and $600 million were siphoned out of the ecosystem, which is kind of crazy, and it's the biggest hack in crypto history. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of greed, speculation, but the security of the game, which should have been better because it was blockchain, was compromised quite easily. So that's another aspect of gaming that we would need to discuss as to how much of the game's data should be on chain. Like, for sure, all transactions should be on chain, etc. But even like, do small changes that like actions that a player takes need to be recorded on a blockchain, or can that be stored on centralized servers, and only the money aspect of it is on chain? I mean, that's a design choice. I think for a game to be successful, it would have to be partly centralized, partly decentralized, with the money part definitely being on chain because blockchains are inherently more secure, and the rest of the gameplay, etc., can be stored on a server controlled by the game itself. I don't see the problem in that. Anyway, now let's go on to the pros of crypto gaming, because we've only talking about how shit it is, but there's definitely some great aspects to it, which is why everyone is so excited about the space. So the number one is obviously ownership and tradability. So the way I think about it is, imagine when you play Fortnite, and let's say you buy like a really good skin, or you through the battle pass, you were an early player and you got the best skins. Imagine you could trade those skins in for real money, right? Because such a big game, if it explodes and you were early to it, and you collect these very rare skins, emotes, whatever, you can now sell that for real money if it was a Web3 game that was on chain, which is just, I mean, I can imagine that people would pay crazy amount of money for some skins. The second
they
thing
already
that
do, which they already do,
yeah,
right? Like on
yeah,
Fortnite and stuff.
yeah, I mean, you can illegally kind of buy accounts, and you can give skins to people and they can pay you on the side, etc. There's obviously a black
No,
market
no,
of sorts that
yeah. No, I meant it in terms of not saying that, this is something Fortnite already does, so why crypto? More like um there is an established market for this. Like the skins market in Fortnite in general is so big, right? So it's not like this is some number that we're dreaming up out of nowhere. There's established demand for these things.
Yeah, definitely. And the crazy thing is, these skins emotes have no bearing on gameplay. It's just to flex on people, and still people spend so much money on it. So yeah, it doesn't have to be, pay to win. Like a game like Fortnite, the gameplay itself is so fun and so addictive that you'll always want to go in for that one more round. And I think that's what any game would strive to do, is, make sure that people always want to come back, always want to play more, and it's addictive, right? And the rush when you kill a player, for example, that's unmatched compared to most other games. Um, right. So the second thing that crypto would, the way it would benefit gaming is an improved player experience. So let's say, instead of a game developer, for example, with Fortnite, they kind of set the creative roadmap for the game. They are making all the decisions, and players just kind of have to take it. right? And there's so many times they keep changing the meta and they kind of break the game over and over again by introducing new weapons, etc. Imagine instead of them calling all the shots, instead it's a community built game or community governed game where users can come in and make proposals, for example, that this is what we want to build for the game. They can get funded for it, they can get paid for it. Imagine if players could come and just build creative maps, for example, and build game modes that people could come in and play and be rewarded somehow for those creations. That would greatly enhance the number of things happening in the Fortnite ecosystem, the number of different ways, directions it could go. Because it's community built, people all over the world have ideas. If they could build out more rapidly, and it would also be more like the community would have to vote on it, so that you're building something that everyone wants, unlike Epic Games, which just kind of does things and people have to take it, right? So that's another aspect of it where crypto could really, really help.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I'm not 100% sure whether I would agree in terms of, a community-led game is the most effective way of creating a game. I mean, like there have been so many games created by gaming studios, and when like things like stories, which have which have a structured vision behind them, where it's a lot more compact and where it's the output of someone's vision, right? um I think that can in many occasions be more powerful than a community-led story or a community-led game that comes out from a story, because I feel like that could just be a little more watered down, or well, um, I don't think humans are meant to create to that level of depth in a group. But again, like it's not like the option shouldn't be there. All we're doing is advocating for options, and all crypto allows for is greater optionality. So it's not like giving people the option and the ability to create games together is inherently a bad thing, and it's going to stop individual games from coming out. It's yeah, in terms of the success factor though, I would rather bet on a gaming studio like Rockstar Games or something like that, to come up with a joint vision of how games should look like. But again, yeah, it's
I
up for
think
debate.
I think it's a function of the quality of the community, because when it comes to just lore and game story, there are a lot of examples of when communities and in Web 2 the community would be the fan base, them coming up with a lot of fan fiction and fan variants of the future of the even for Marvel, for example, or if you look at the anime community, there's huge fan fiction and Naruto, Dragon Ball, and so on and so forth. So in that aspect, I actually do think there's a lot of merit in community-led, growth of narrative, let's say. But then, to your earlier point, in terms of where the existing organizational structures actually do better is actually putting stuff together, because there's a lot of like technical development, financial, just
Backing.
planning and backing to be done. And from that standpoint, it's still to be seen if a decentralized community can actually execute on those type of projects. So I think that's to be seen. But in terms of story, I definitely do see lore, I should say. I think there's a lot of merit in community-led, projects.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that can go either way, actually. I mean, if you think of, for example, Game of Thrones, and the last couple of seasons, I mean, everything that I saw on Reddit, on, our free folk or whatever, everything that I saw on Reddit was better than what they put together.
Exactly, exactly.
Right?
Literally, they could have done anything differently and it would have been better. Like I think they chose
Yeah.
the worst possible route to get to the
Yeah.
finale.
Yeah. But anyway, sorry, Yash, go on.
Yeah, so I mean, to summarize, I think a model that could work here is that, a big game studio or any studio, they develop the game in a centralized way initially because, they can control the rate of development, they'll have all their coders together, etc., and they can develop the game. And then if the game takes off and it has a massive community behind it, then they can think about decentralizing ownership over the game using a
Yeah.
token, obviously, and then once the game is established and you have your core gameplay, then the community likes it, and there's a like a lot of fans of the game, etc. For a game like Fortnite, for example, if they decentralize the community now, the governance of the Fortnite ecosystem, it would be massively beneficial because Epic Games has already come in and built the game, right? The core engine, the mechanics, etc., already done, and that's not really going to change because that's why people are playing the game in the first place.
You know, I actually would disagree slightly with that. And this is just speculation, but to me, what logically makes sense is if a studio in the beginning, yes, they would conceptualize and develop a game completely in a centralized fashion. But then in the second part, when they launch it and the game is, getting traction, if it does astoundingly well, something like a Fortnite, or that level of success, I don't. In fact, in those situations, I would think that the rational thing to do is to keep control of it because then the value would accrue to them. But in a situation where a game doesn't do as well, then it wouldn't even make financial sense for them to continue pouring resources in it where they're not getting that commensurate return. And in those situations, maybe it might be better to give the community ownership of it, so at least the people who actually believe in the game might take it forward in whatever form or fashion. And in that sense, then they also have the ability to redirect resources to a game, a future game, or a game that already is doing really well for them.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I guess it depends game to game, I guess, how they want to,
Yeah, and
go
the
about
value
it.
capture mechanism.
Yeah,
And also, I
definitely.
mean, what this basically shows is that you have a variety of ways in which to give ownership back to your fans, in whatever way, shape, or form you want to, right? I mean, you can give it to people. If you're not going to continue working on a project and there are still avid loyal fans of that, like a cult following or something, you can pass it over to them. Or if you want to truly decentralize the game after a certain amount of time, let's say after a year or two of the game being out there, then you can do that as well. And the at the core of all of these, right, is the fact that for especially for things like this, you need to have a very, very carefully and carefully thought out and structured governance mechanism, because you don't want games and like gamers are probably some of the more vocal fans of any types of media that are out there. You don't want to make it seem like, oh, you're telling them we're going to decentralize, give ownership, but still control essential elements, or allow that ownership to be corrupted by outside elements, like for example a one token one vote thing, where someone can just buy off a ton of tokens on the secondary marketplace, right? Like you should kind of try and link it to the amount that people are playing off that game, and then reward them in that manner, and then have a very fit for purpose governance mechanism for that game. I mean, these governance mechanisms should not really be replicable, and they should across games, unless the games and the communities are very similar. So they should be a lot more bespoke, and therefore that's how you will keep fans happy and allow them to positively influence the future direction of the game.
Definitely. Right. So I think that mainly covers, the pros of Web3 gaming. It's economic incentive alignment, chance to earn real money, community built games if done properly, and really decentralization of ownership of the game as well, right? I mean, community built games only make sense if people have ownership in the game, because then they're incentivized to make the game better. Anyway, there's also other problems with crypto gaming and the way the different models that kind of came to light in 2021. So the first thing I saw or noticed was that lots of games started releasing NFTs, right? So the NFT craze started before gaming, where first it was just NFT art that people went crazy over buying. After that, it was PFP projects where they release a standard set of 10,000 similar but different profile picture type projects like the Body Yacht Club, for example. And then gaming studios and developers, they also started doing the same thing where they release NFTs to kind of raise money from the minting, and then they would use that money to create a game which the NFTs could then be used for. But the problem with that is there's a clear pay to win type of mechanic happening where you firstly, to get access to the game itself, you need to own an NFT, which I think is kind of crazy. The game should be more accessible than that. And the second thing is, by releasing only 10,000, you're kind of limiting the number of players who can come in and play the game from the first place, right? So in two ways, NFTs, the way they kind of did it, didn't really make any sense. The second thing was, how DeFi had liquidity mining, gaming studios, etc. They kind of did the same thing with their tokens, where you can, stake your tokens and just earn more tokens in the future. And this was kind of a mechanism put into place to, attract capital so that many people would stake, and this would lead to upward price pressure because lots of people come in and stake for the rewards in the future. But when the rewards come in the future, they'll unstake and they'll sell all those rewards. So it's kind of a pointless exercise where you're just staking to get money in the future and you don't really care about the game, right? You're just trying to, yield farm and get the hell out. That's another thing that games did, which obviously an unsustainable model because capital is constantly going to leave the gaming ecosystem. And the third thing is that during the mania, because of gas costs and because of very high demand, the people who actually wanted to come in and play games, there was an absurd barrier to entry caused by upward price movements. And to play Axie Infinity at its peak, you would need to pay several thousands of dollars to buy 3 Axies so that you could go and play the game. So those are lots of different problems with crypto gaming that need to be solved for. Potential solutions are, kind of cap the barrier to entry, cap the cost of entering the ecosystem so that, the cost of entering is not bound by demand and supply and speculation where it gets prohibitively expensive to enter the game. The second thing is we need to do away with, these staking and liquidity mining schemes. It's quite clear that it was a way to attract capital, but long term, it's not a sustainable business model for sure because you're just giving away money for free to people just for staking. And the last thing that I saw is that none of the games they actually made were any good. Like to actually play, they weren't fun. And I think people need to and studios need to start prioritizing making a fun game before they introduce the Web3 and crypto aspect of it. Because long term, people will only come back to a game if it's fun. They're not going to come back for the economics of the game, right? Gaming is supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to be studious or whatever. And the last thing is that there was a constant outflow of capital because of the way these games were designed. Like people were constantly incentivized to take the tokens they earn and just go and sell them, right? And every time you sell these tokens, that's money leaving that gaming ecosystem, right? So they need to figure out a way to keep that money in and incentivize gamers to use their in-game currency for other uses other than just going and selling it. So these were like the 4 main things that were problems. And now before we go forward and discuss how we can actually design a really good crypto game, do you all have any thoughts?
Yeah. One thing I'll add on to what you said is instead of a price cap, I think most games will have to compete with existing gaming models and probably the most popular gaming model is free to play. Right. Obviously the poster boy of that is Fortnite. So having a price cap, in my opinion, could work in select cases, but in most cases might not actually end up working. And the way to actually create monetary value or I should say tangible value would be just from fans enjoying the game and seeing and deriving value from that. So instead of a price cap, let the barrier to entry financially moot, like make it accessible to everyone, and then be the sole function of value, be the how fun the game is, right? And that's essentially what games like Fortnite are doing. The value is derived only from people wanting to come back and play more.
I definitely agree with that. I think that the number one takeaway from what you said and what I've also observed is that the most important thing is that a game just has to be fun to play. Like you don't really need to focus on the earn. The reason that the reason that gamers get annoyed with NFTs and crypto and all of that is because it's very obvious that they are just focusing on the earn element and not really on the play element, right? And that's also, well, like the gamers are like, well, we didn't really ask for the earn element, and you're not making good games, and it just seems like you're trying to rip us off by just selling us random things that you say are unique, right? And the marketing's not been done well. Like no one really understands in that space what an NFT can actually do, and like what its future prospects for the gaming ecosystem are. And no one's really focused on the play aspect of it. So you have to organically drive users back in via your gameplay, and that's actually the most powerful thing that can be done. Like crypto is an augmentation to a game. It elevates a game, but to get from 0 to like 100, a game has to be good in itself, and then crypto provides that 100 plus. That's kind of my opinion on how crypto can augment gaming and GameFi in general. And obviously, like there are many ways in which a carefully designed tokenomics can help keep users in that ecosystem and keep coming back, but it's not the primary driver for people to keep coming back into that ecosystem. What should be the primary driver is, how your storyline is, like how the game is, how the gameplay is, how the graphics are, literally everything that makes up a game and makes it valuable today. Those are what are still going to be important about a game, because let's be honest, there have been some absolutely fantastic games that have come out in the last few years. I mean, I like through the first part of COVID, I literally spent an absurd amount of hours playing Red Dead Redemption 2, and let me tell you, I don't think that there was any crypto element that could have I felt like was needed to make that game better. Could it have been augmented by it, by creating, like Yash, I think you're going to talk about sinks and faucets and all those kinds of things, but could it have been augmented by it? Of course. Was it integral to my enjoyment of the game? No. And that's the important part to realize, that crypto is not the thing that's going to drive people towards games. It's the games and the gameplay itself. So that has to be the main part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. The way I'd see it is, instead of wanting to go and earn something from a game, if a game is really fun and I'm paying $10 and I earn maybe, I get back $3, but I had a shit ton of fun playing that game, I'd take that any day over, trying to
Exactly.
invest in a game and try to make money out of it, right? Gaming inherently is meant to be entertainment. And
Exactly.
in a way, what play to earn showed is that people will try to earn money in any way, but that is not the future that crypto gaming should strive towards, because we want to make gaming more fun and make experiences that would not be possible in current Web2 games. And that I'm not talking about the earn aspect of it, like other ways of incentivizing player and making kind of more seamless experiences in terms of transactions, etc. That should be what crypto is striving for. Like the way a player can earn money should depend on his skill in the game, not just how much he can click, right? It should be
Exactly.
that it's like in Fortnite, a really good player should earn money because he's good at the game, and it should be that people kind of put in money and gamble in a way, and the best players kind of make money right out of the game. It
Yeah.
should be that inflows are greater than outflows. That's the way the game will make money.
Yeah, and I mean, people really underestimate how difficult it is to actually make a good game. I mean, I've been watching my flatmate play that new Horizon game for about like a month, and it's so intricately designed. I mean, there's so many different considerations that go into every frame and every action that like the main character can take, and that's why it takes years to come up with this stuff. I mean, people in crypto going like, oh, the games are just going to be stratospherically improved just because we introduce some tokens into it, is just, it's why people are it's why people get annoyed with this space, because we don't need to try and impose our will onto anything. We can try and improve the games and work with the gaming studios, and with create AAA or like AA games or whatever they're called, um with OG gaming game developers, and try to help them improve their product, rather than just coming in and saying, oh no, you guys don't know what you're talking about, we've got a better product, we know what's good. It's not the way to go about it.
Yeah, and one thing which you brought out earlier, which is very important, is the marketing of things, right? And then not just play to earn, even though play to earn serves as a great case in point, but across the crypto industry, marketing has been, not done well, and as a derivative of that, there's a lot of misinformation being spread, right? Like I was seeing a video the other day on that I was covering this whole game backlash of uh, GameFi by the gamers. And one of the main reasons was the environmental concerns, right? Even though that's been pretty well documented now that that's not really as true as they make it sound. So marketing, yes, GameFi has to definitely improve, but I think it's true for across the board, man, and the whole industry to
Definitely.
figure out how to actually go about it.
Definitely. So with that, let's move on to, how exactly to design a game. It doesn't, not just a crypto game, any game with a functioning economy it's basically a mini economy, right? And you need to make the correct decisions for your economy to make sure it lasts for, a good amount of time into the future. So different aspects of a gaming economy are essentially your currencies and your resources. So a currency in game is basically, it has no other use other than the fact that you can pay and exchange your currency for other items within the game. That is how you define currency. And a resource is something that has some kind of use in game, but you may or may not be able to also exchange or burn your resources to create another resource, right? So that's just the basic distinction I want to make before we go further between currencies and resources, right? So now, how do you connect all your currencies and resources and ensure they flow the right way within your economy? So there are different aspects. So the for five different aspects that I look at or that are generally accepted are known as sources, sinks, converters, traders, and your inventory, right? So what are sources and sinks? It's very simple. Sources are the way the currency and resources are created within the game, and sinks are the way currency and resources are destroyed within the game or used up for something else, right? So for any functioning economy, you want your sources to kind of be well balanced by your sinks to ensure that there aren't too many sources and too little sinks, such that there's lots and lots of currency being created within the game, but players don't have anything to use their currency and resources on, which ends up, players don't they don't use it for anything, so they just end up kind of hoarding their currency, and price of items within the game don't really matter to them anymore because they already have so much currency, right? So you need to ensure that whenever money is created within the game, it has some kind of future use where players are incentivized to spend it, right? Whether it be, trade in for items or, upgrade your skill level or whatever, there should be enough sinks to ensure that players constantly want to strive and earn more currency. And that's how you keep getting players back into the game, right? The other two aspects, converters and traders. So a converter is basically how you can go and change one resource into another. So let's say, for example, in a game like, I'm not sure which game exactly, but let's say you were mining iron ore. If you mine enough iron ore, you can convert that into steel, for example, right? Or a basic example like that, where your resources are converted from one thing to another, and when they're converted, you're kind of you have the new thing and the old thing is burnt in a way. And then the traders are essentially players, even in a traditional game, where they exchange one currency for another, right? So they are basically a user. And the last thing is the inventory. So the inventory is a limited amount of items that your player can kind of hold with them, right? So making inventory decisions is also a crucial aspect because you kind of have to make trade-offs. And trade-offs are good within a game because then you have many different options of of which a gamer can kind of take within the game. So these are your five kind of aspects or pillars of your economy, and you have to manage these different pillars in the correct way, right? So GD Keys is like one of the best blogs I've ever seen about how to design games, and they came up with a bunch of rules to ensure that your gaming economy works correctly, right? So the rule number one that they have is define the number of sources and sinks of a currency by how much agency you want your players to have in playing or progressing through your game systems, which is what we just discussed. That your sources of currency create currency, but they need sync so that the currency flows and this currency is actually utilized and there's not kind of hyperinflation of the currency. The next rule is related to generosity. So what is generosity exactly? Generosity is how generous you want to be with players when it comes to rewarding them with currency, right? So if you're too generous, then you're rewarding them with too much currency, and the price of in-game items ends up not mattering to them because they already have so much currency because you're too generous. But if you're too stingy also, then players don't feel like they are incentivized to continue playing the game because they're just not making enough to go and upgrade or buy things within the game that they normally could. So the second rule is uh, you need to be perfectly generous in a way, which is obviously easier said than done, but you need to balance out how generous you are with players. You need to be like the perfect balance of generous and stingy with them to ensure that you're not leaning far towards either way, because either way it's catastrophic for the game long term. Rule number 3 is that a balance between a currency's sources and sinks can vary over time, and use this relationship to drive players' behavior and cater to their current needs. What this means is that in the beginning, for example, you could reward players a lot more because then they kind of feel like, oh, I'm playing the game and I'm earning things and it's good. And then they can spend when they keep earning, right? But throughout the life cycle of the game, you can't keep rewarding players at the same rate because eventually you'll be rewarding them too much. So a way you can design it is that early in the game, the gamer is rewarded a lot, and as the game progresses, they're rewarded less and less, so that it gets tougher and tougher because they've already gained so many resources, right? So that's one way to kind of ensure a balanced gameplay throughout the life cycle of the game for the player. Before we go further, any thoughts, comments?
Yeah, I mean, this is much like, how do you, it's so difficult to achieve these equilibria, right? Because
Yeah.
I mean, like you're trying the perfect level of generosity, for example, like how do you test for that? What are the I mean, how would you go about testing that? How would you go about testing, for example, how much the appropriate amounts of rewards to give are in the first place, at the start of the life cycle, and then what is the level of depreciation of those rewards, right? Like how do you what is the process used to come to an understanding of what that equilibrium point might be? I mean, and you
I
don't need to
mean,
know this. It's just,
yeah, it's really tough, right? Because they're like, even within the people playing the game, they'll be so diverse, right? Everyone will, their mind works differently, so they want to do different things within the game. So it's very tough to optimize for a single kind of truth, I guess, because gamers want different things and there'll always be, some kind of,
friction.
friction, etc. Yeah, exactly. So I don't. There's no game, by the way, ever that has not ended up hyperinflating their currency and then having to use like drastic measures to counter that. And
Yeah,
that's simply that it's basically, if you look at it, any in-game currency is a fiat currency, right? It's not backed by anything and it doesn't have any supply cap usually. So inevitably it will get hyperinflated, and the way game developers kind of deal with that is they seem like temporary measures in a way. Like if you look at GTA, for example, most people now have earned so much money within the game that money has no value to them really, right? The value comes from the things the money can buy, and if you can buy everything within the game because you have so much of it, the game kind of becomes
boring.
non-competitive, right? Boring. Yeah, you can just buy the best cars, etc. So what they started doing is constant price increases to kind of counter the amount of money people have. So like I was looking at a chart which was very interesting. It was the price of a car within GTA in 2013 and now. Okay, the price of that car in 2013 was 66,000 in-game dollars. That price now is around $2.7 million. So that's the kind of hyperinflation you're seeing within GTA, and that's why you're also seeing drastic price increases to kind of cope with that.
Yeah, I remember by like the end of Pokemon, for example, you just had so much money. Like you could just buy like whatever
Yeah,
you wanted because you just won all that money by like fighting the the championship or whatever it was. So like it's just I get the difficulty of doing that, and I'm sure that there are many innovative ways of kind of adjusting for that. But yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. So the next thing we can go on to is essentially recognizing that within your game, you'll have different sub-economies. And what I mean by that is your game kind of works in different phases, right? The way I see it is there's a introduction or exploration phase where you're introduced to the game. So there's a few resources, etc., that you kind of interact with, etc. So that's the first aspect of the game. Then the middle aspect is with the core or the body of the game, where you kind of understand how the game works and you're deep into it, and you'll end up needing a higher skill level to be at that place in the game, and that usually ends up having different resources, etc., because you obviously need to upgrade from your basic level to your intermediate level, right? And then the last aspect of the game is when you're like a master of the game and you've reached end game, and you're only incentivized by certain rare loot or features, etc., and that's your reason to come back to the game. So that's the usual life cycle of a game, where the players introduced to the game, then they start playing the game seriously in the middle, the core gameplay, and then the ending where they basically defeated the game and they're only coming back for those rare things that they could basically find, right? And mapping these different sub economies and pillars together is kind of really crucial in a way, and it directs how the player is going to be incentivized throughout the game. So you need to ensure that you recognize your different sub economies, you recognize the different resources for your different sub economies, and ensure that this resource distribution in a way is as balanced as possible. And there's no outsized way to kind of earn resources, and any way you earn resources, it should be as fair as possible. It shouldn't be that there's a meta in the game, because any kind of game that has a meta, it usually gets broken, and then it gets broken and it needs some kind of patch. So to start itself, you should design your game in a way where there's no particular meta. So like there's games where you can be a warrior, you can be a wizard, etc. It shouldn't be that choosing to go into one of those paths is easier and better compared to other paths, right? Each way there should be trade-offs. Trade-offs are great for gamers, as I said before. So yeah, that's another rule. Ensure that your sub-economies are perfectly balanced and resources are well allocated, essentially. So the next rule is that your number of currencies will be dictated by your systems, their relationships, the level of player agency and freedom your game requires, and the safety nets you need to put around key systems. All this means is that if your game has multiple currencies, you need to ensure, like I had said before with currencies, and you need to ensure that your currencies can be exchanged at a fair rate. It's such that like let's say in a game where you can own gold or silver and you can exchange your gold or silver for other items. It shouldn't be that earning gold is way more profitable for you and you can exchange for a much higher amount of of resources as compared to a proportional amount of silver. It should be well balanced either way, even in that aspect, not just resources, even the currency should be well balanced. uh, the next rule is that now you have your currency, you have your resources. What you need to do is kind of project those into the future and see how it would flow, right? So, for example, in GTA, if they had done some kind of exercise, they would have figured out that obviously users are going to earn a shit ton of money, and if we keep prices, what they were in 2013, money will have absolutely no value because people will have so much of it, and the prices are just so low that people could just go and buy anything in the game, and that's really not fun anymore. Because if you're like the king already, or you're like god within the game, there's no, like, you've already beat the game, right? There's no reason to come back to the game, really. So it should always be a challenge, and there should be trade-offs for a game to be interesting. So projecting the value of your currencies into the future is crucial to kind of see whether players will end up and whether it's a place you want them to be, and whether it's competitive enough for them. Before we go further, any thoughts?
Yeah, I guess that like this is a lot about how you design a good game in general, But what's the crypto angle here? Like, what is the Web3 angle in terms of why is Web3 important in this, right? Like, because you can design a currency that does all these things, you can design a game that does all these things without needing any angle or component of Web3 in it. What is the true value proposition of Web3 here? Like, why is it needed?
So Web3 is needed, I would say, because currently the way games are designed, there's no seamless tradability and exchange of assets that's really there. Your counterparty is always the game developer, and they are in complete control of the currency, right? And that could be beneficial, but I think that's mostly detrimental, because if the community was governed by a bunch of token holders, they would have more of a reason and incentivization to ensure that the economy is functioning as well as possible, and that currency inflation is in control. Because if the currency hyperinflates, you automatically, as a owner or community owner of the game, by owning the governance tokens, kind of getting screwed, because currency is getting hyperinflated, and you know player interest is going to drop over time because your currency is getting hyperinflated and it has no value anymore to players. So that is where I think Web3 can come in and really change it by ensuring that there's incentivization for everyone to want this economy to succeed, rather than putting the entire onus on the game developer and kind of just taking those changes, right?
Yeah. Also, I think the rules that you're going over right now are more to to how to construct a good game economy or sustainable game economy, and the Web3 angle to it. Um, for games as a whole is just what you spoke about earlier, right? Which is ownership, provenance, liquidity. I mean, that's all that Web3 is offering, which is massive in its own right. But these rules that we are going over are integral for Web3 games to keep into consideration, because right now they're not. And only then will Web3 games really fulfill its promise, right? And that's why it's important to go over these sort of exercises, even though this particular thing doesn't have a direct correlation with Web3 or Web2. It's applicable to both.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just wanted to clarify in terms of, whether this is just broadly applicable, or whether we were getting to a Web3 point. But I think that, yeah, in terms of the the benefits, it's just the benefits that we've spoken about for the last however many episodes we've done, right? The same benefits translate. It's about how you use those core primitives to
Yeah.
enhance your gameplay, I guess. So yeah, I'm Yash, I don't know if you've got this, but if there's any concrete examples that you can use in terms of how like a Web3 primitive, like how for example getting more liquidity could improve the gameplay of a game, for example, and where it might actually be more beneficial for users.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the example of it off the top of my head, but I think the tradability aspect gets way more enhanced with crypto. And also, yeah, as Sid said, liquidity, right? It's way easier to bootstrap liquidity in crypto as compared to traditional markets. Like, you can introduce a token to raise money in the first place to create the game, or you can, that if it's a community owned game and you want to create like a specific storyline or something, you can raise that money way more easily from a community of decentralized users as compared to a game developer who's, it's very centralized, and they can take considerations from the community, but the community has no actual final say on it, right? It's core gameplay. I'm not sure why crypto is needed to enhance gameplay. It's more around the economic aspects of it, and incentivization by crypto will come in. Core gameplay, I mean, we're already seeing amazing games. I don't see how crypto can change the core gameplay. Like, let's like see for example, Fortnite. The core gameplay has nothing to do with crypto. It's just an amazing game to play. It's addictive, right? Fortnite would get
Yeah.
augmented where V-Bucks, etc., your skins, etc., could be tradable, and you could kind of make real money off it. That's where the value comes in, because currently, once you put in money into Fortnite, it's into V-Bucks. You can never exchange it back for normal money, right? It's gone. Like, it's
I
gone,
think
money
that makes
gone.
sense.
Yeah.
And I think that another thing that I would say is just on the flaunting angle, right? I mean, like if you've let's say that you're playing a game and you've gotten to like the last stage of it, and you've gotten this really sick sword or something that no one else has. And everyone who plays that game knows how difficult it is to get it. Well, like if you're sitting there like playing against the computer and you've just got a sword in your wallet and you can't really display it to anyone else, well, that's kind of pointless. And like you get that internal satisfaction saying, oh my god, I did this, but you can't really show it off. And I think that one of the main ways in which games could actually be augmented by crypto is in actually transporting those items. If that item's an NFT, right, you can display it in your NFT gallery and you can show it on like any like NFT social media app or whatever, like try Showtime maybe, or you can just like put it as a badge on some social media profile that you've got maybe on Lens, or maybe just like an integration with like a traditional Web2 social media if you still use that, right? So I think that those are the kinds of applications of Web3 that are important to games, and I think it's important for us to call these out here because it's I mean, I think your points around how to construct a really good game are integral for Web3 game developers to keep in mind, but also for our listeners, it's also very important for them to understand and be on the same page about, well, why crypto for games? What does it actually do? And the base answer essentially is that, well, it's not going to improve your gameplay. It's going to augment everything around it in terms of the economics and in terms of your experience around playing that game, rather than improving upon the core gameplay and storyline or anything like that. So it's an augmentation and not a replacement.
Yeah, I
Is
mean, I
is
guess
my motto.
we actually didn't cover that the main thing that crypto actually helps with is ownership of your in-game assets, right? The reason Vitalik Buterin created Ethereum is because he had like a game-breaking item in World of Warcraft, right? And it was a sick item. And then one day the developers just took it out of the game, right? And there was nothing he could do. It was gone, right? Because everything is hosted on centralized servers, etc. This is where crypto can really change it in that once you own an in-game asset, it can't be destroyed, right? Because you're owning it directly in your wallet, technically. And ownership over these gaming assets, like although these assets currently are not tradable from one game to the other, like you can't use your, like if you had an NFT for a really good item, you can't use that over different games. But hopefully, different, let's say FPS shooters, let's say they, decide to come under a common standard and apply that same standard, then you can, for example, use guns maybe across different game FPS games, for example, and you can kind of create gaming ecosystems where there are different games, but you have NFTs that are applicable to be used across different games. Now, that has not really been seen yet, and it'll be really tough to actually do this, but this is another way I see NFTs and crypto really benefiting users, because now you can own an NFT that's then used across multiple different games and it has lots of value. And if it has value, then you can assume that people would want to pay for it as well, right? And
But just to keep that under, like, just a consideration around that is that gaming developers don't usually really want the items and the gaming assets that they create to be super interoperable, because they're trying to, in the initial aspect, create a very self-contained ecosystem in which in which the mechanics behind those items and the way they look are not really easily portable across games. So I don't think that, for all that's kind of feasible for all games. But I think that the examples that we use in terms of a community building a game out, while communities can build games out together, different games, and then decide to collaborate and have their assets interoperate and do all of those kinds of things, right? So that's a completely different design space which gets opened up by Web3 and tokenization and building games out in this particular manner. The success is yet to be seen, but again, it's optionality that's important, and whether it succeeds or fails, I mean, that's up to the market and how good the games are really, right, and how well the community has designed that game. But it just provides further options for what is possible in the gaming space, and that's never really a bad thing.
I think honestly, in terms of interoperability, more than and of course this is speculation, but I think more than say game genres, I think it's gonna be game game ecosystems. And what I mean by that is, say like a Nintendo. Let's take Nintendo as an example. a Web 2 version of an interoperable game, in a manner of speaking, is Super Smash Bros. Because that has characters from all different games. And I can envision a time when, and it's in Nintendo's interest to make a new game like a Super Smash, which has very characters from all over their universe, right? So I can easily envision a game like Super Smash, or maybe Super Smash in the future, where they have a completely Web3 backend, where the avatars are actually acquired by the users in their own respective games, and then they bring it to Super Smash with being actual owners of the avatars, right? So that's one example of how you can create, instead of enhancing gameplay, you're actually creating a whole new form of gameplay, right? Using Web3 infrastructure. So that's one possible way of how gamers might actually be in favor of interoperability.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah. And one more thing I think we haven't really discussed is that, let's say currently you play Fortnite, but the only person making money is Epic Games, right? Let's say Epic Games released a Fortnite token, and if you invest in that token, you can earn a share of the platform fees by owning the token itself, right? That's automatically a brilliant way to get, you know, more people invested into your project and have a vested interest in the success of Fortnite, because now users own the Fortnite token, they're earning a share of trading fees, and if that token is also a governance token, they can set the future direction of where the game is going to go, right? So if investors come in, they own the token, they're making a share of the fees, you're kind of betting on the success of the game long term, right? And I wish, I started playing Fortnite really early. If there was a token on Fortnite and I knew about crypto, etc., I would have definitely invested in Fortnite, because you can just see that it's a winning game because of how addictive it is, right? So that's another way that, game developers can kind of open up and allow investments to come in from users, investors, etc. And then a lot more people have a vested interest in the success of the game, which I think kind of strengthens it.
Correct. And I think this, to a broader point, is that crypto enhances capital efficiency across sectors as opposed to any single game. So how we talked about Audius in a prior episode, how crypto is actually making the whole ecosystem, a whole industry more efficient. And similarly, in gaming, cryptos is really making say, like you mentioned, kickstarting the network effect of a game, aiding discovery in terms of having on ground grassroots, at a grassroots level, people actually telling others about the game because they have a vested interest. So the benefit of cryptos at a more macro level when it comes to industry, as opposed to any particular game, which of course it does, but the broader point is more at a industry level.
Got it.
Agreed. So now we've discussed, the kind of overview of how Web3 crypto gaming did in 2021. We discussed the pros, we discussed the cons. We also discussed the best ways to kind of design a game to ensure that, sinks are always greater than sources, etc., and to maintain the value of your in-game currencies and resources. With that, now we just want to make a few predictions for the future as to where we kind of think crypto gaming is going to go. So the first one that I think will come to fruition is that Web3 games made by Web2 developers will start hitting markets in the next 2-3 years. So AAA games by big developers usually have, very long development cycles. There's a minimum, they spend like minimum $100 million on development and another 100 million maybe on marketing. So these are huge kind of layouts of money, and it takes a lot of time to develop a good game, which is why I don't think we've seen like AAA Web3 games just yet, because they need to make sure that their game design is perfect from the get-go, unlike these games we've seen, which, with shorter development cycles, with not that great gameplay, with Ponzi-nomics. They've kind of just rushed it to market. A AAA game can't do that because of the amount of money they're kind of investing into the game. So they'll take their time, but I think in the next 2-3 years, we'll see AAA games with crypto aspects. The next prediction is that play to earn and play and earn, etc., are kind of, I don't think they are long-term business models. The long-term business model for any game is be a really good game. That's the first thing. So I think we'll see games come in the future with amazing graphics, etc. But the reason people will play the game is not because of the crypto aspect, it's because of the amazing gameplay and the core addictive gaming loop aspect of it. And crypto, like we had discussed, will just augment that, not be the core idea behind why you play the game, as we've seen with Axie Infinity or even Step In, for example. Not really a game, but similar kind of idea. The third prediction will be is that gaming NFTs will really take off, and soulbound tokens and evolutionary NFTs will kind of be key to that. Soulbound tokens are useful because they're non-tradable, etc. And I can see many different use cases for having a non-tradable NFT within different games. Another thing is an evolutionary NFT, which is an NFT that changes over time. So you could have a NFT of your player, and that NFT could be constantly augmented by different NFTs that are added to it, or it can evolve according to rules hard coded within the game, right? So as these NFTs evolve, you can then sell it to someone else because you've evolved it and made it such an amazing character, etc. That's another way I see this working.
Yeah, just as an aside to that, right? There's actually an interesting Ethereum standard. I forgot which ERC it was, but it actually allows you to decompose an NFT into its constituent parts. So, like for example, if you think of an NFT that is a human, you can make it like a head, ears, hands, torso, legs, and like imagine a game in which you have to go and collect all of those parts to form like an NFT, which is like, it doesn't have to be human, but it can be like a very valuable, item that you have to collect different parts of. And then you collect all those three NFT parts, and then they become one thing that you own. And, you can, and you can see in the history of that item, how you've collected those parts. So that is the kind of innovation and composability that tokens can allow for.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you. Then the next point is that because Web3 games, they've commanded such high market caps in the past, it's a fair assumption to make that the best games will be highly valued, and there might be overinflated values because of hype, speculation, etc. But because these games are commanding so much value, and now this value can be exchanged for real money, the gaming economy becomes that much more crucial, and the long-term survival of that economy is that much more crucial because now there's real money involved in it. So I predict that in the future, every single big game will have a kind of central bank governor in a way, or a committee that kind of governs the economy and ensures its survival over a period of time. Because currently, the way games are working is that they've thought out their currency for a short period of time, but they've not thought about the long-term implications of how they've designed their currency. And only once the problem occurs do they try to go and fix it, right? And that's not a sustainable way for an economy to grow. You need someone constantly at the helm ensuring the long-term value of the currency and long-term efficiency of the economy, which is why I think they'll have, these gaming, the DAO of the game, for example, will elect a committee who they'll entrust to kind of run and govern the economy and ensure inflation is kept to a minimum of the currencies within the game. Another prediction is that in the near term, we'll see lots of Web 2.5 games and lots of Ponzi schemes still coming into the market because those have a much shorter development cycle. And if you can market your game really well, you can kind of start that Ponzi loop where people start flooding in capital, and early investors can kind of exit and sell to people who are coming into the gaming ecosystem later. And because they have shorter development cycles, they can release games a lot quicker as compared to a big game, which is a much bigger kind of commitment. So we will see long-term benefits, but we will also see lots and lots of different scams, as is become the norm with crypto. So just beware and ensure that the tokenomics are sound. And also, please just play a game only if you like playing it, because I think there are other ways to earn money than to just click a button on a phone. And there's more useful use of your time rather than just trying to play to earn. It should be enjoy the gameplay and maybe earn is the better way I would want to frame it for the future.
Yeah, I think that's
And
not catchy, but pretty good.
yeah, maybe we can think of something to shorten it, but whatever. And the last prediction is that we'll see a serious rise of gaming guilds, because usually gamers like to kind of collect together. So a gaming guild can kind of earn crypto from different Web3 games. They can, collect the best gamers, and that's a massive other earning opportunity for people to join a gaming guild or invest in a gaming guild, because the best gaming guilds can, earn crypto from the best crypto games out there, and could actually accrue more value to a holder than a normal game itself could. So watch out for gaming guilds. That's the last prediction.
Cool. I think that, we've discussed pretty much in depth a lot about the gaming interaction with Web3 and crypto and the rise and prospects of GameFi. So yeah, I think unless Yash and Sid, you have anything else to add, maybe we can wrap up. But yeah, the main message is make your games enjoyable, add crypto as an augmentation, and in the future you'll reap the benefits from seeing the impact that primitives like composability and liquidity can have on gaming economies. But the first and most important thing to get right is just make a fun game.
Yeah.
Yeah, make a fun game and then really ensure that your economic design is sound, because Web2 games we've seen, economies kind of collapse, currencies hyperinflate. Try to ensure that doesn't happen with your game. Usually, pretty much all games, it ends up hyperinflating. But if you can delay that as much as possible with good design choices, that's the way to go.
Yeah,
And
correct.
don't try to make it a Ponzi scheme style thing. And instead, ensure that more money is coming in than leaving the system.
Yeah, a useful mental model is, right now we have game developers without any Web3 experience, or we have Web3 developers without any game development experience.
Yeah.
Right. What we need is Web2, like game developers with Web3 experience, and that is what it's very scarce right now. I think there are a couple teams working on it. Like, you have Big Time. Big Time's a game that I'm looking forward to. But these are like this cohort becomes slightly more significant is when I think the whole ecosystem will, let's say, mature or be on the right track to maturity.
Yeah, I guess if we're kind of looking at games to watch out for, I would put Star Atlas and Illuvium on that list also, because they looked like they had good gameplay, and there's the crypto aspect also. So yeah, definitely wants to watch out for.
Yep. Cool. Perfect. Thanks everyone for listening in, and catch you on next week's episode of Genesis Block. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and watch out for the article that's coming on GameFi later on this week. Cheers.
Cheers, everyone.
See you guys. Bye.